Hello, and thank you for tuning in to watch my presentation. My name is Niels Nedergaard. I'm a handball enthusiast and a biomechanist working here at the Human Movement Analysis Laboratory in Hvidovre, Copenhagen. Today I'm going to present some results on a small explorative study we've done here in the laboratory. And basically what we looked at was the leg kick movement of an Danish international lead goalkeeper compared to the movement pattern of under 18 goalkeepers. So I'm sure we all can agree that goalkeepers are playing a very important role in handball. And a good goalkeeper gives you an edge over your opponent. It's shown in the literature that a strong goalkeeping performance is associated with the successful success in elite tournaments and in matches. But what makes a good goalkeeper? Well, first of all, they have to have strong anticipation skills and a certain amount of smartness, because they have to be able to read the game, anticipate where the shot might be coming from, and then also anticipate where the ball is going. Then when they have all this visual information, they then have to do a movement to block the ball, either with the arms, hands, or whatever can get in the way of the ball. And basically, as a biomechanist, what I'm interested in is to understand the movement they're doing to block the ball. So what we wanted to look into in this study was basically the leg kick block, which is a traditional block used by goalkeepers at different levels. And for that reason, we had one adult international female goalkeeper coming into the lab where she did the leg kick and compared it with data we've collected in the past from 5 under 18 elite goalkeepers. In both cases, the goalkeepers had to complete a total of 6 trials, 3 on each legs. And by simulated leg kicks, I mean they didn't have to have a ball, because they weren't standing in a goal. They were basically standing inside our laboratory, where we had 8 motion capture cameras that could record the movement of 21 reflective markers that we placed on the lower limbs of the goalkeepers. Based on these information we get in the lab, we can then reconstruct a skeleton of the goalkeeper's movement. And what I have here and what I'm going to show is an example of the adult goalkeeper's leg kick movement. I'm just going to start it here so you can see it while I talk. And it's impressive to see how high they get the leg. And that's where we wanted to see if there was a difference between, first of all, how high the adult goalkeeper could get her leg compared to the under 18s. What you see here on the right is basically the black line is always the position of the marker from the start of the movement and until the point where the goalkeeper reaches the maximal foot height, which is around here. What the movement is basically characterized by is the amount of flexion, the red line here. So you make a flexion in the hip. The goalkeeper does some kind of outward rotation, keep the outward rotation doing most of the movement. She does it in combination with an abduction as well in the hip. And then there's, of course, the knee flexion, where she flexes her knee in the beginning. And when I play it again, keep in mind the whiplash-like movement you see around the knee in the last part of the movement here. Boom, that whiplash there. So basically, this adult international goalkeeper was able to get the foot up to about 95% of her height. Impressive, right? So the next example I have here is then you have the same graphs on the right side. In this case, the blue line is the data from the video. I'm going to play an example in a second. And the dotted black line is the position of the heel marker during this movement. And the first obvious thing that comes into mind is the distance between the dotted black line here. I can make a small drawing here. The endpoint of the young under 18 goalkeeper compared to the senior goalkeeper, as we see here. All right. So the other thing that really stood out was the amount of hip flexion. The blue line doesn't have the same range of motion of hip flexion during the trial compared to the red. Similar, we saw that the amount of internal hip rotation, which is the curve here in the bottom, that the young goalkeeper weren't able to do the same amount of outwards rotation in the movement. The flexion, knee flexion, and the abduction was pretty much similar between the under 18 goalkeeper in this case and the international Danish adult senior goalkeeper. So if we look at it at a group trial, we basically see that the adult goalkeeper was able to lift a foot higher than the under 18 goalkeepers. She was able to do it at a faster pace. And then when we wanted to see basically, okay, so which of all these parameters we can get out of a movement analysis can explain why the adult keeper was able to lift a foot higher and do it at a faster pace. And one of the things that stood out was the amount of hip flexion. So the hip flexion the adult keeper is doing from the point she lifts her foot and until the foot reaches maximum height is higher than the amount we see from the under 18 goalkeepers. The other thing that stood out in terms of joint angles was the amount of outwards rotation at the hip while she was lifting her foot. It was in general higher than it was for the 5 under 18 goalkeepers. The third thing that stood out was basically that the hip was the powerhouse of this movement for the adult goalkeeper. 70% of the power created from the joint of the lower limbs of the kicking leg was generated from the hip in the adult senior goalkeeper, whereas the values were lower for all of the under 18 goalkeepers. So basically one of the reasons she was able to get a foot higher was because she generated more work from her hip. So what is the take-home message from this presentation then? Then at least our results indicate that if you want to improve your goalkeeper's maximal foot height or the velocity in this movement, you want to look into what's going on at the hip. You want to increase the hip flexion and improve the outwards rotation. Focus points for coaches should then be the increased hip flexion, of course, and work on the flexibility of those muscles, as well as you have to focus on how you're getting to the endpoint and the timing of when you're doing your outwards rotation and when you're doing the abduction. As mentioned, the outwards rotation was the main difference, but it's also about how you get to the endpoint. Have to focus on that they have to make an outwards rotation at the hip before they start to make the abduction. Thank you all for listening and see you soon. Bye.